Thanks, Francis, and hello, good evening, everyone. I'm going to be talking about the project and all sorts of things, but first of all, a bit of background to how this project started. It's true to say that it's been more than a decade in the making, largely in the longer term because of the Herefordshire Amphibian and Reptile team, HART, who have volunteers who look specifically at freshwater habitats and mainly ponds, and specifically one member of their team, Will Watson, who's now the project ecologist, was noticing that the ponds in the northwest of Herefordshire, which are thought to have been of Ice Age origin, were much more diverse than other ponds in the county. And after many years of cajoling, this project has come about through a partnership with Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, who are managing the project, and Herefordshire and Worcestershire Earth Heritage Trust, who are providing the geological interest. More about all that later. So I'm going to be talking about Ice Age ponds, but firstly a big thanks to all of those who buy National Lottery tickets, and of course the National Lottery, without which we wouldn't be doing this project. So I'll be talking about how they were formed, where they are, why they're so important, why they need protecting, what the project has done so far, and what we're hoping to do next. So when I first joined the project, I looked at the application, and one of the first lines in it was, "At a time when mammoths and other megafauna roamed the countryside, a retreating glacier created distinctive landforms, including kettlehole depressions, formed as huge chunks of glacial ice melted. Many of these depressions were filled with water, and they're still around today." And that is really, when I've been going out to shows and things like that and talking to people, the fact that you can actually go to a pond in Herefordshire and think that that has been around for 20,000 years or so and could have had a mammoth wallowing in it is really captures people's imagination. So that's a really important part of the message that we take to people, and seems to be a very good way of engaging people with the importance of this heritage. So the origins, this is a picture from northern Canada, but it's a similar sort of glacier that flooded into northwest Herefordshire, flowing over from the Welsh mountains through relatively narrow gaps and through onto the lowlands of northwest Herefordshire. And in its path, it was pushing like a big bulldozer going in an easterly direction, pushing and bringing with it all sorts of deposits, gravel and sand and mud and all sorts of things. And this, when it's dumped down, is called moraine, and it's in this moraine that the Ice Age ponds have developed. This is the extent of the glacier. It got as far as roughly a line along the A49 between Hereford and Leominster, and then actually pushed over and then retreated quite rapidly. And it was, as it retreated, it dumped all this material. So this is a map, not terribly distinct, I'm afraid, but the red line shows the extent of the glacier, and the pink areas show where what we call hummocky moraine is deposited, and it's in this hummocky moraine that we find the Ice Age ponds. So this is Herefordshire here, and Kington is here, Leominster's here, and Y is down here. So you get an idea of the coverage, but it's very patchy, so it's not everywhere. This illustration you can find currently in the Hereford Museum exhibition, but I put this up because it shows quite nicely the process of how the Ice Age ponds, and particularly the kettle holes, were formed. So this depicts glacier coming over here. The black dots indicate the moraine and the material that's being brought over. And then as the glacier retreated, it left this moraine, this material, and also left large chunks of ice, which were at that time buried in the moraine. And then as time went on, the ice obviously melted as the climate warmed, and that left a void in the moraine, which has led to these ice age ponds. And one of the features of these ponds is that because they were so deep and they're so long lived, they can have peat deposits in the bottom of them, which makes them particularly interesting because they then become a record of past climate and past vegetation in that region. So where we can find peat, and we have found a bit of peat in some of these ponds, it's a very good record of what's gone on in the past. And this is a mini kettle hole in modern moraine. I think this one's from Iceland. So this is formed in exactly the same process. This is the moraine material left behind by the glacier. This was a piece of solid ice that's now melted and created a void. And this, on a larger scale, is an aerial view of a modern glacier moraine, where you see these holes that have been left by the melted ice. And this is a sort of hummocky moraine that's left, and this is the characteristic landscape as it was in a very early stage before it got vegetated over, that would have occurred in this part of Herefordshire. And if you imagine that scene 20,000 years later, it's vegetated over, it's undergone several periods of vegetation change, it's now been covered in agricultural fields. And this is an area, sorry, I want to go back, let me do that. This is an area near, as it says, Letton Lakes and Sturts Nature Reserve, as it was flooded. And this period shows quite well, the floods show where the kettle holes are quite well. See these areas. And you can imagine these were these voids in the moraine. This was formed slightly differently than a moraine. This was actually a lake bed of an ice. It was an ice age lake essentially, but with large chunks of ice which were left in the same way and created these voids. So they're essentially the same, and certainly date from the same period. And one thing you'll notice is that there's lots of them very close together. Another crucial, important characteristic. More about that later. So why are they so important? Well, they, as I've explained, they represent an incredible ecological and geological ecosystem which has survived that long, 20,000 years. They're quite restricted in their distribution. So most areas of lowland Britain, so most lowland ponds there are only about 2% of lowland ponds which are of natural origin. And in Herefordshire, and this part of Herefordshire in particular, it goes up to 25%. And where they do occur, they have very rich species assemblages, which include some rare and protected species, which we'll see later. Often the density of the ponds within this hummocky moraine is very high, and that's very important for some species like the great crested newt, where having lots of different ponds at different stages is quite important. And also, one of the reasons why we're raising their importance is because, particularly in the second half of the 20th century, many have been lost because of agricultural improvements, lack of management, although it is largely the agricultural improvement which has led to the major losses. These are an example of some of these ponds at the Sturts Nature Reserve, Herefordshire Wildlife Trust's reserve. and they look like fairly ordinary ponds. But if you walk over the rest of the reserve, you'll see this pot marked with lots of ponds, some of which are dry, some of which are wet, some of which lay wet only in the spring and summer and dry out in the autumn. And these are other examples of them throughout the county, some of them not quite so distinct in terms of being round and kettle hole-like. They're much more elongated features. A lot have been, obviously, being around for that length of time, it means that they've been modified in various ways. Some have been dammed, some have been dug out in places. But we're finding that even those which have been quite heavily modified, provided because they have their origins, and at least part of the pond has its origins this long ago, and that continuity is still there, the diversity is still there. So it doesn't necessarily mean just because the pond has been modified that it's not important. It's still very often more diverse than other ponds. This is a pond, a set of ponds actually, of particular interest at Kenchester, and this shows the variation in water levels. And this particular one is quite mystifying, because you'll see that's the same tree there and there, and it doesn't appear, the water levels going up and down doesn't appear to have any relation to the season. So they're groundwater fed, and you can see sometimes you can see little springs popping up and feeding them, so the water levels can come up. So it's very much dependent on what's going on beneath the ground, and this is another characteristic of some of these Ice Age ponds. This is one of the Ice Age ponds which is of particular importance. It's at Mockers Park, NNR, and we've done some surveys. It's been quite well studied over the years, and this is one of the ponds that we've done quite detailed management surveys of, and written a management plan of it in order to try and maintain its interest. And you'll see this geology map here on to the right shows where there are areas of peat. So it's quite large areas of peat underlying what is the blue, which is the hummocky moraine deposits. So these are classic areas. And another pond that we've been doing, which is quite rich as well, and we found some very interesting species there, is just south of this at Blakemere Mere, which is very wooded, but it still holds a lot of very interesting species. This is one of the species. Medicinal leech is only found in that pond at Mockers Park in Herefordshire, and so it's found in other parts of the country, but it's very extremely rare. But it's only found in Herefordshire in that one pond, so far as we know, and we'd very much like to do more research to find out if they do occur in more Ice Age ponds. This is also one from the lawn pool at Mockers Park. A lot of these photographs are taken by Will Watson, who's an extremely good photographer and pond ecologist who's working with us on this project. And this is Graphidurus cinereus, which was found, it's only found in Herefordshire in that pond. So there's quite a few really rare species that have turned up in that pond. So this one is very rare throughout the UK and only found in that one pond in Herefordshire so far. Likewise, this is another rare diving beetle, not quite so rare, but this one was found, I think, also in the lawn pool as well. Agabus uliginosus, quite an awkward name. This one found in the lawn pool, but its close relative, Agabus undulatus, was actually found in the Blakemere pond about half a mile away. And that's the only record of it in Herefordshire. The nearest record for that species is on the other side of Cambridge. So it just shows you that how important and restricted some of these species can be. And it's not only, these ponds are not only important for these rare species, but the common species. If you've got rarities, it quite often means that you've got all sorts of other more common species as well, but more of them. So therefore, the ponds are more diverse. They have more habitats. They're able to, or microhabitats, and they're able to support a lot of species. Common toad being an obvious one, found in a lot of ponds, but also a lot of ice age ponds. And the great crested newt, that's one which very much benefits by having lots of ponds in very close proximity, because they have quite a wide range of wide range, up to about 300 meters. And if there are several ponds within that range, and if they are able to lay their eggs, newt eggs will only survive to adulthood if there's no fish, the pond lasts long enough and is diverse enough to provide the food for the offspring, and also the surrounding habitat is good enough, because this species spends most of its time, as do most newts, in terrestrial habitats. So if you've got a pond, if the only pond that's available for newts to lay their eggs in is full of fish, then you're not going to get many young coming out of that pond. But if you've got ponds that dry out in late summer, late enough for newts to be able to develop to a big enough stage to develop and then go into the terrestrial stage, then you're going to get a lot. That's going to be a very productive pond for great crested newts and other species of newt as well. Not only animals, invertebrates and vertebrates, but plants, a lot of which are restricted. Tubular water dropwort is one which is restricted to ice age ponds in Herefordshire. Thread-leaved water crowfoot, another one, and a whole list of other species which tend to be more diverse and more common in these ponds. Water violet there. Bladderwort is going back to the lawn pool again in Mockers Park. Is only found in Herefordshire in that pond, and a fascinating plant because it can survive in very low nutrient status water. It doesn't feed off the nutrients in the water as a lot of other pond plants do. It doesn't feed from the soil. It feeds off small insects within the water body, and it's called bladderwort because of these little bladders on the roots here, which actually have little triggers on them which suck insects in when they go past, and gradually digest them and use that to create nutrients for the plant. Tufted sedge, going back to the Kenchester ponds, one of them in particular has a wonderful show of tufted sedge. It was quite dominant in some areas, and again that's not a common species found in every pond, and you find them quite often in ice age ponds. Again, water stick insect is not a one particularly restricted, but it's indicative of a very good quality. I love that picture because it looks like a praying mantis underwater, and that's one of the species which can be found in diverse habitats in very good quality ponds. Again, insects which are not obviously so restricted, they're able to fly. Black-tailed skimmer is quite a widespread species, but also relies on good quality ponds. But the small red damselfly, again, it's very, very mobile, but this species was first recorded at the ponds in Kenchester in an array of kettlehole ponds, which is kind of an indication of the diversity of those ponds and the importance of them. One thing which our ecologists are finding are the not such big and obvious showy things, but the tiny things like this mud snail, which is quite a rare species and found on the Sturts Nature Reserve. Not something most people would would take much notice of, but they are actually quite rare species. So going on to, so that was about why these ponds are so important and why we need to try and preserve them. And this is the negative side about why we're losing so many and have lost so many. This is an example of illegal infilling, which was not that long ago on a local farm, where somebody was taking the advantage of a big hole in his ground by inviting people to come and pay to dump their material in it. I think this person was prosecuted by the Environment Agency later on, but you know, that sort of thing may still be happening on a smaller scale. This is an example, historic example. The picture on the left, you can see this field here and this one here, the same field. This one was probably taken in 1970s. You can see it's got an array of these little ponds. This is on hummocky moraine. You can see this, the hummockiness around lots of little ponds. This today is an arable field where all of those ponds have been filled in. So very little of interest there. Obviously much more productive, but we've lost an awful lot of wildlife potential from that area. Again, the picture on the left was a before picture, and after shows this rather nice natural pond having been made into one single lake, which is probably either used as a reservoir or with fish or carp or something. Anyway, the biodiversity has obviously decreased significantly. So these are the sort of things which have happened decade upon decade, and is leading to a reduction hugely in our pond wildlife. So with this, with all this in mind, and as I said earlier, the partnership got together and put together this application to the Lottery Fund, and our activities last year included recruiting and training volunteers, and I think we recruited about 56 volunteers and trained them up to carry out surveys, and we also prepared a conservation strategy, which you'll see later is a pro forma of information we can use to go out to landowners to inform them of the importance and how to manage their ice age ponds on their land. We did lots of surveys of sites, again with the volunteers, liaising with the stakeholders, contacting people who have ice age ponds on their land, some of the local authorities, parishes and the county, who are interested in the presence and maintaining ponds on the land. We've prepared management plans, 15 management plans for a selected number of those ponds which were surveyed. We prepared costings and the business plan for this stage of the project, and all that was put together and submitted for actually this stage of the project, which we're in now, which is called the delivery stage. So what the project has enabled is it's brought together geological and ecological expertise, both out in the field and generally. The steering group worked very well together, and the ecologists worked very well together to combine knowledge of the geological interest with the ecological interest. But the initial surveys were looking at collecting quantitative data on the physical data on where the ponds were, the shape of the ponds, checking the nature of the substrate by augering, looking at water quality, which is quite interesting and could be used. The information that's been gathered could be quite useful if we can analyse that data. And also in choosing the ponds, using a mixture of the old maps LiDAR, which is a system of which involves essentially it produces very high quality and very highly detailed topographic information, which can show you the contours of the pond, because these ponds, the characteristics, one of the characteristics of ice age ponds is that they lie within their own depression. So they're not on stream, then they collect, they have a catchment area which draws in to the bottom, and the contours of a LiDAR map will show you that much better than an ordinary map. And this is an example of LiDAR coverage of so the area on the OS map looks like that, and this is what the contours look like when it shows up on the LiDAR. It shows you every little up and down of the landscape, and shows you where the low bits are and the high bits are. Yeah, very great detail. So on the ground, we had coring going on, and this is one of the examples where some peat was found near a pond, and this was all recorded, so you can see the stratigraphy of it. There's some peat layers here going down to before the peat started to develop. And this has been stored, and hopefully we're going to get this analysed at some stage. This is Will Watson doing surveys of and collecting species and identifying them to produce the records that we've got. This is the water quality analysis going on, which can be now carried out by volunteers. And obviously a lot of people involved in getting trained and then coming out to do the surveys. And the idea being that once they were trained, had we not had this COVID emergency, we would have had a lot more people going out on their own with equipment that we could provide to cover far more ponds than we were able to do on our own, just the professional staff. Sadly, that's been very restricted, but we're hoping that we can use that technique much more next spring, hopefully, if things get somewhere near normal. This is an example of the material that was produced for the training. So we have this was produced for the training courses, and a manual which people can take away with them, which shows and explains how to fill in their forms when you're actually at the pond in order to get the data. And that produces, there's a spreadsheet, an enormous spreadsheet of some very useful information on each of the ponds, where they are, the basic habitat information, the amount of habitat information like floating weed, submerged weed, duckweed or filamentous algae. That's all useful information if put en masse and compared with the species data as well. And then, as I said, you've got particle analysis, people looking at the quality of the soil, whether that could show whether it's proper hummocky moraine or whether it's been filled in at some later stage. And these are colour charts which show you the type of soil. And this is a chart recording the water chemistry. Big part of the project was the ecologists and geologists working together to produce a survey and management plan for 15 of the ponds. This is an example of the end product, if you like. It's a fairly detailed map. This is Lawn Pool again at Moccas Park, showing in quite great detail the different habitat types and all the different trees, which is a very useful record of the current state of the pond. And this is the species that were collected during that. This is a list of these are just the diving beetles. There are 29 of those. I think there were 52 species altogether found. Bear in mind, this is one visit, producing 50 odd species. And I think normally on one visit to your average pond, you probably get 20 species. So it just shows you the additional diversity of these ponds. And this is the end product. It's what we're dealing with at the moment. A very sketch of the management that's going to be proposed. Each of these crosses is a tree that's either going to be removed or coppiced or pollarded in order to allow a bit more light into the areas. What happens naturally, obviously, in ponds is that if they're not managed, they do tend to succeed to woodland, and the pond interest often disappears. So without the natural processes of having beaver around and large mega herbivores, these ponds can totally disappear. So what we're aiming to do is at least partially replicate natural processes in keeping some of these ponds open. Education, all important education, talking to kids and younger people about the importance of ponds, wildlife in general. But we visited I think 7 primary schools last year, the wild play team from Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, and did a few morning assemblies, and I went and did a few and talked about the Ice Age, and sort of engaged them with the film Ice Age, and talked about Manny and things like that, and talked about their school being under 30 metres of ice, and amazing interest came. And then the rest of the day they spent doing pond-related, Ice Age-related activities, and I think they went down really well. And this activity was sponsored by Kingspan. So, telling people about the Ice Age ponds. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is producing an app. We're going to be producing a geocache trail where people who are interested in following GPSs can go and find a geocache and find out a little bit more about Ice Age ponds. A few interpretation boards are going up at strategic points on Herefordshire Wildlife Trust, publicly accessible sites where people can see these ponds. We're going to be producing a pond management leaflet. There's already information on the website. We'll be producing a nice little booklet on Ice Age ponds. Lots of community events which happened last year, not so many this year. And we're at the end of the project, which will be in around November, December 2021. Yeah, there will be a conference probably held at Worcester University. This was a leaflet that we produced early on in the project last year, telling in very brief detail the importance of the ponds, and then there's a little tick box where people could express their interest and leave their name and addresses so we can contact them at a later date. And this is what the app looks like at the moment. It's being developed, and it has loads of information on it. It's got introduction into the geology. It'll have more information on the biological side of things. There's a landscape tour that you can do in a car. You can do it on a bike. You can do a walking trail at the Sturts and Birch's Farm. And you download these, and they will. You download them and just do it in your home and learn all about them. But they will also geo-reference you in the field, and you can follow and actually look at the view as it is now. And the idea being that we can show you on this via the app what that landscape would have looked like in the Ice Age. So it's an amazing piece of kit. What we will be needing is people to test that when it's ready, which will be a few months yet. So that'll be quite a fun thing to do. This is the guidance for landowners that I spoke of, that we will be producing a very brief leaflet which we'll try and get out there via the NFU and landowners associations to raise landowners' awareness of the importance of ponds that they might have on their land. and it has a sort of traffic light system for finding out whether, or assessing whether it's okay from a conservation point of view to do work on a pond, and you can seek advice if you have a particular sort of pond. This is something which has almost happened as a result of lockdown. Beth, the project officer, has been working with a number of volunteers who've been given online access to the old OS maps, and looking at those as a baseline, and comparing those with aerial photographs and modern maps, finding out where there are ponds which are no longer there, where there are ponds that aren't logged on the map, and the idea being, well, what we found is about 1,500 potential pond sites which we'd like to go to find out the condition of them, whether they're still there. Basically, it means that if a pond was on the 1880s sheet, it's probably quite old, and if it's on the right geology, it could well be an ice age pond. So we're hoping that we can send volunteers out to do this by means of footpath, or by contacting landowners in their areas to see if we can add to the information that we've got. And that's what one of these maps looks like. So the red diamonds are extant ponds as indicated by aerial photographs, and so we're sure they're there. The stars are ponds that appear on the 1880s map. So you see quite a few maps that were on the old ponds that were on the old maps aren't on the modern maps. But there are some that are both. So these red dots with stars behind them, that means they should be extant, and they were on the 1880s map, so they could be old ponds. And if they're on the right geology, the geology where it shows, I don't know if you see that on yours, it varies the colour, but most of this screen is a sort of greeny blue, as opposed to the light blue down here, and this is the hummocky moraine. So all of these ponds are on the right geology to be ice age ponds. Quite exciting. And in the last few months, we've been trying to publicise the importance of the ponds by talking to the BBC. Came out and filmed us at Croft Castle. There's Will in the pond, and Giles down here identifying species. This is Josh, one of our volunteers, and we all did a bit to camera, and it came out and lasted about 3 minutes, having spent all morning filming it. It's 3 minutes, but that's how it goes. But I think it came over quite well. And this is Phoebe Weston from the Guardian, who's currently sort of finishing an article about the project and ice age ponds with Ian Fairchild, Professor Ian Fairchild, explaining the intricacies of the geology, and Will explaining the intricacies of the creepy crawlies that are in the pond. So look forward to that coming out, probably online to start with. And one of the things which we were hoping to do much earlier in the project, which is now happening, is the Ice Age Hereford exhibition. We have a section of that all about Ice Age ponds, and it's now, in case you haven't heard, it's now open. You can visit. It's restricted visits, and relatively few people in at a time, but it's open on Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 2 to 4, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday from 11 to 1. And we're hoping to have a few activities and a bit more of a presence there later on. So we spent quite some time, Beth and I, getting with others from the museum, getting Fluffy, the Ice Age mammoth, from a museum in Dudley, in the back of a Luton, taking him apart and then putting him back together again there, which was quite fun. And one of the things when I was there was pointed out that this hand axe from the late Stone Age was found in Kington, which is right very well in the middle of some of our Ice Age pond areas. So again, you get the notion that some of these ponds were the habitat of Stone Age man as well. So what's to do in the next year or so? Lots more ponds to survey, detailed management plans for 5 more ponds in the hope that these will be legacy ponds. So we want to write management plans for landowners that are interested, and hopefully more funding is required, but we're hoping that we can encourage landowners to carry out some of the management on some of the more important Ice Age ponds. The management plans that we produced last year, 15 of them, we're currently at the moment sorting out contractors to carry out that management work. We're going to be creating 1 or 2 new ponds in what we think are kettle holes that have been filled in, and particularly one of them is going to be at the Sturt Nature Reserve. So we're very carefully excavating that in order to create another pond adjacent to a whole load of other Ice Age ponds, and who knows what we may uncover in the process. Another thing in the future, which we were hoping to do this winter, is encourage a team of Ice Age pond management volunteers, because obviously once the project is finished, some of the trees, for instance, that we've cut down that are going to regrow, we want to try and maintain a relationship with the landowners of those ponds, so that before those trees get too big, we can send people in with loppers and bow saws in order to keep them down at a level where they're not going to start shading over the ponds again. And that will obviously require quite a bit of volunteer work. Skipping to pond champions, which could well be instrumental in the process of the volunteer management, what we're hoping to do is recruit a number of pond champions in areas where local people have Ice Age ponds in their area and want to get interested in managing these ponds into the future. The data analysis is something, all that data that you saw in the spreadsheets, if we can, there's a lot of very interesting information that if it's analysed in the right way and translated onto, or put into GIS information systems, it may well show some interesting things that we haven't yet realised about the distribution of species and water quality and Ice Age ponds in general. We'd like to initiate improved protection. That's going to be partly using the proof that or the evidence that we've gained through this project to put forward to the authorities. But it's going to happen probably informing local authorities. It's going to be encouraging the agri-environment schemes to fund the management of this sort of pond more readily than your average pond. And that's another thing is developing the app in the field. So as Francis said earlier, there's a website which is that one, which if you go to it, it will give you a lot more information on the project, and there's a page where you can register your interest and get involved in the future, we hope. And also if you scroll right down to the bottom, you'll see there's a donation page where you can do that, and this is my email address if anybody would like to get in touch later. And this on behalf of the project team, these are all members of, that's Richard from Hart, Giles and Will, who are the project ecologists, also part of Hart. That's Professor Ian Fairchild, who's the Earth Heritage Trust rep. This is Andrew Nixon, who's my boss, who has played a large part in putting this project together. And it's Beth Andrews, who's the project officer, who does a lot of the organising volunteers in the field. And that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thanks ever so much, Dave. That was fantastic. And thank you to everyone who's joined us. If you do have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A at the bottom. If you click on the little Q&A symbol, you can type away. We have had one question in, Dave. which is from Emil, which is, are you planning any public access to the Ice Age ponds?
There is public access to some, certainly at the Sturts Nature Reserve, Herefordshire Wildlife Trust. If you go onto the Wildlife Trust website, you can get access to that one. Also, the Birches Farm up near Kington. There are a number of Ice Age ponds. These both will be part of they both have leaflets and will be part of the app. So when the app's available, you can download that and get a guided tour along there. So, but there are various other sites which we hope to be able to publish, which are accessible on public footpaths. And again, the app will show those. We'll also advertise those in other ways. But yeah, there are. It's difficult to point people to many of them, but there are one or two around that people can visit.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had someone, could you just put your, go back one slide to show your email address again, Dave?
Yeah.
For some people that want to capture that. Fantastic. And we've had another question through, which is, how common are these types of ponds across the UK?
Well, so generally speaking, ponds of natural origin in the most of lowland Britain, there's about 2% of ponds are of natural origin. In Herefordshire, it goes up to 25%, and we think there are about 1,500 Ice Age ponds in northwest Herefordshire alone. So that shows you that the occurrence of natural ponds in this part of the world is much higher than other parts. There are kettle holes and other Ice Age ponds in Shropshire and slightly further north, in those areas where the ice sheet pushed over from Wales. But this is northwest Herefordshire is quite special, and it was an area of relatively low land that was invaded by the ice sheet and created this very special geology in a quite large, widespread area.
Fantastic, so we're pretty special. Another question is, are landowners generally positive and cooperative, or is this an uphill struggle to engage them?
Well, the ones we've been engaging with so far are amazingly cooperative, and yeah, one of my jobs is to phone people up and ask them if they'd be happy to have a survey, and most of them, yes, they are. I mean, I think the thing is that nowadays, if that pond's still existing, there's in all likelihood they're not likely to get filled in, because that would cost money. They're also part of what we call what's known now as natural capital. So farmers have the ability, if they have a piece of natural capital on their land, it can attract funds for their stewardship schemes. I think in the past, you saw a slide earlier of somebody filling one in. There are obviously those that really don't give a monkeys, but on the whole, I think the majority of landowners and farmers are quite keen to maintain the interest that they've got, and they don't really want to destroy it. But they're constantly fighting against the business side of things and needing to make a profit. So it is a bit of a struggle, but there's a lot of good people out there.
A question that follows on from that is, what chances are of achieving protected status for the ponds, and how can that be achieved?
I think in the short term, it's going to be an uphill struggle. Natural England and the like are not designating quite important sites anymore. Well, at the moment, the likelihood of small ponds being designated is unlikely. I think the protection is, as I say, partly going to happen in terms of people valuing them, both for in their own right, for local people, caring about them, people getting involved in them, letting landowners know they're there and they're of interest and why they're of interest, and sort of that raising awareness is part of the protection. The statutory protection is a longer term project, but what we're hoping to do is using this this data and this information that we're gathering to put that case to it would have to be information available to local authorities, and to enable a little bit of protection from the planning point of view. So it's not an easy process. It'll take a long time, but I think the thing we can do in the short term is raise people's awareness and make people aware and care, so that they do something on the ground in their local patch.
A question from Val. I wondered how the pond life remains intact in the ponds at Letton Lakes and the Sturts, which flood every year. How does that affect the wildlife?
Well, I think bit of flooding is probably the least of their problems. It's when they dry out too much that's an issue. So most of those species are evolved to live in aquatic habitats. So even if the water levels go up, by several feet, as they obviously do quite regularly around there, that's not too much of a problem. And if they're even particularly in that area, what makes that area good and important is that if species were raised out of a pond and into the floodwaters, as the floodwaters retreat, it's more than likely in that area, or more likely in that area than others, that that species might end up in another pond or a ditch and unable to get back into another permanent wet area. So I think one of the issues is the health of the surrounding habitat and the number of ponds. So where you have more good habitats, large areas of good habitat, and ponds in particular, the more you have of these sorts of habitats, the more likely it is for species to be able to survive adverse conditions.
Fantastic. So that seems to be all the questions, unless someone's busy typing now. I think a couple of people had trouble joining us at the beginning and missed the start, so I'm very sorry about that. I think we had most people with us, but if you missed it, I am recording the whole talk, so I will send that link round so you can just catch up on any bits that you missed at the beginning, or watch it again if you enjoyed it a lot. Huge thanks to Dave. Thanks to everybody who joined us. It's a really exciting project, so it's great that there's so much interest in it, and there's still lots to do, so very exciting. Do check out the pages on the website. We'll keep updating them, of course, as the project develops. Do check out the exhibition at the museum, and the mammoth looks very exciting. And yeah, get in touch with Dave if you fancy being a pond champion. Fantastic. So we're going to leave it there tonight, but if you do think of any more questions, obviously do email Dave directly or get in touch with us in all the usual ways. Thank you ever so much, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.